Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to cover React's Context API, which is a powerful tool for managing states and dealing with props across our applications. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to don't miss the rest of our videos, and let's jump into the video. Okay, here we have our simple React app, which is simply this main.jsx and our app.jsx right here. And at the first, we're going to create simple thing right here that we know why we should use Context API and how using context is going to make our work very easy to code and manage. First, let's say here we have our simple div right here. And here, of course, we got our app. And then here, let's say we got two other components, which are the c1.jsx, which is a functional component. And again, we're going to have the c2.jsx, which is our another component right here. And we're going to have something like this. Our app is going to contain our c1 component, and our c1 is going to contain our c2 component. So this one is going to be c1's child, and this c1 is going to be this app's child. And this c2 is actually this app's grandchild. And now let's come and create some things right here. First, because we have the divs all around of our app, let's here create another style.css. So we give that a little CSS right here. So we're going to target our divs, which we want the simple border of 2 pixels solid blue right here. And let's say we want this border radius to be 15 pixels. And let's say we want some margins right here, 10 pixel is enough, and some paddings. Again, this is going to be 10 pixel too. Now let's add that here into our app.jsx. So we're going to import this /style.css, and we should see this result right here. And because we don't want to wrap all of the components, because as you know, here in our index.html we got this div and we don't want this. What we can do is we can have this class name right here to be, let's say, the simple app, and here we want to target the class of app and all of the divs inside of this class. And this should give us this result. And let's make this border radius to 10 pixel too. This is good. And now let's come and add the c1 and c2 into our app too. So at first here in our app, we're going to implement our c1. So here we're going to have the c1 just like this, which is not imported automatically. So let's import that right here. We want to import c1 from, it's going to be here. Now you can see we got our c1, and now let's come to our c1, and here let's create our c2 right here. So let's see if this auto completion is going to work or not. No, it's not. So we're going to have the c2 right here, and here we're going to import that at the top of our file. So we're going to import c2 from this ./c2 right here. Now you can see this is how our app is going to be, and this is basically the structure of that. We got our app component at the base and first level, then we got c1 inside of that and c2 inside of our c1 app. Now let's say we want to show some name or some random numbers in all of these components. What we can do is having this, let's say, simple variable of name right here. And we're going to have this tag for our example right here. We're going to pass this name prop right here, and the value is going to be, of course, this name that we just created right here. And now we should come to this c1, create this name right here, and use this as prop right here. So let's use this here. After the c1, I want to have this dash and then this name right here. Now you can see we got this tag right here. Let's do the same thing here in our app too. We're going to have this name here. So we got this right here too. And let's come into our c2. And here we should do the same thing too. We should distract this name from our props, or we can use the other method actually here. Let's use this props right here. And then here we can have this dash right here and then this props.name. And pay attention, we should pass the prop right here. So we're going to have this name and we equal that again with this name that we got as prop right here. Now you can see we got all of these items right here. Actually, let's make this a little zoomed out so we can see this better. You can see we got this set all around of our app, and if we want to change this, for example, for Tom, you can see all of these items changed just by changing the variable name. But this method, which is called prop drilling, is not very good way to manage and pass props and some variables or states between of our components. What we can do is we can use our context API. And what that does is instead of passing, for example, this Tom each time for its lower and child component right here, we're going to create this Tom and this variable as our context. And you can think this is going to be here in some other part of our app, and whenever we want to use that, we simply take that from here and it comes only to the component that we need. So let's say here we want to create context for our name. The way that we're going to do that is first by importing the context from our React. So we're going to have this import, and here in our app, when we want to create context, we should import this create context right here, and it's going to be from this React, of course. And after we do this, here below of our importing and above of our function, pay attention, this should be in our app's scope and not inside of the function. Here we're going to create our context, and how we're going to do this is by simply having this const and the name of our context. For example, in our case, I want to name this to name context right here, and then we equal that with this create context that we just imported right here. And pay attention, this is a function and we should call it. But by doing this, we cannot access the context that we have created. What we need to do is first we should have this export before of our variable. So we export this into our whole application, and when we want to use that, this should be accessible. Then another thing that we need to do is having provider. And what provider is, we can explain that like this. When we want to use our context in some of our components, you can see here we got only these two lines in our apps, but let's say here we have some, let's say, nav bars here, or maybe we can have some parts for our web page. Let's say we have multiple parts here, part 1, 2, 3, 4, and at the end we can have this footer, for example. And when we want to use this context, for example, we only want to use it in this part 2. So we're going to wrap this part 2 inside of the provider that we're going to create. And pay attention, when we use this provider and make settings here to provide only this context right here, we only can access that inside of this part and all of the components in part 2. And we cannot access that, for example, in part 1. And the way that we're going to do this is by having first our opening tag, then the name of our context that we just created, which in our case is going to be this simple name context that we have. Then after this, we should have this dot, and then we should have this provider. And you can see this provider starts with capital P, and this is not going to be self-closing and has this closing tag. And inside of this, we should have all of the parts that we want them to have access to our context. For example, if we have this part 2 here, none of these other components can access this name context except for this part 2 component. And here, another thing that we should pass here is going to be this value. And this is basically the value of the context and variable that we want to send to all of our application by the name of name context. For example, in this case, let's say again, we want to pass this variable of name. So we pass this name just like this right here. And we can access this inside of this part 2. So because in our example, we don't have these items, I'm going to get rid of all of these items and only have our C1 and app, which are our actual things. And because we provided name context right here and C1 is inside of this and we passed the value of name, in C1 we can access to that context that we just created. Now first, let's get rid of this name that we got right here and let's remove the prop that we passed to CName right here as well as here that we got. And let's remove these two items here too. So we don't have those right here. And in the C2, we should get rid of this props and this part right here. And let's actually have all of these items inside of this simple div, which has this C2 inside of it. And let's see if C1 is right too. Let's correct this item 2 here. Now you can see this is our structure. And now let's come to our C1 and access that context that we just created. The way that we're going to do that is first by importing again something from React. And that is going to be this useContext right here. Pay attention, when we want to create context, we should use and import this create context from React. And when we want to use that context, we should use and import this useContext right here. And then after having that, inside of our main function that we want to return as our component, pay attention, this is not going to be here at C1 scope, and inside of the function, we're going to have the simple variable right here. Let's say we want to name this CName right here. C as our context and name for the value of that. And pay attention, this is going to work only here and doesn't matter what name that you want to choose right here. Then we equal that with the function that we just imported, which is this useContext that we have. And then inside of this, we should have the name of our context. Pay attention, this is the value that we have and the name of our context is this one right here. So we should have this name context in our C1. But you can see if we have this name context right here, nothing is going to work. And that's because of this action that we need to import this context here too. And the way we're going to do that is simply by having this import, this name context from, and then the path is going to be where it has created. For example, in our example is going to be this app.jsx, which we had created this context. So what we can do is simply come here and put this dot slash and then this app. And now you can see we don't have any errors here. And if we want to use this name context, what we can do is having again the same template that we had. And here, if we use the CName that we got right here, as you can see right here, and now you can see we got our result right here. And if you pay attention, you can see we don't have any props here and we importing the context from our app. And we can do the same thing here in the C2 too. So we're going to have this import of name context from our app. So we're going to have this right here. Then inside of our function, again, we're going to have our variables. So we assign the context value to that. For example, let's say in this case, we want to name this simple value. And then we're going to use context right here. So we're going to import that from React 2. And then the name of our context, which is going to be this name context right here. And again here, if we want to have, we simply have this value. And you can see we got this term right here too. And by this method, if we remove our thing in our C1, so we remove this use context, we remove this name context right here, and we're going to remove these items from here too. You can see again, we can access to that value and that variable, which was this name, to our context from this component, and the C1 component is not going to use that. And this is very useful thing when we are going to have multiple components inside of each other and we want to use one thing only in one of them and we don't want to pass that variable 5 or 6 times for each component to reach to that component that we want. And one of the other usage, and actually the main usage of this use context, is when we want to deal with states. So here, let's say instead of this name that we got right here, we want to have the simple state of our user. So we're going to use state here, of course, and here we're going to have this user. So instead of having this name context, let's change this to user context right here. And here, let's actually fix this providers too. So we have this user context here, as well as this one. Instead of name, we're going to have this user. And the value, we're not going to pass the name anymore. We want to pass this user that we got. So we got this user here. And here in C1, we don't want to do anything. But here in C2, we want to import that user context that we just created. And here again, we're going to have this user context. And here, if we come to this user and, for example, pass the base value of Ted again here, you can see we got our result again right here. But pay attention, this is state and not variable. And we can pass not only the variable, and actually we can pass functions through our context API too. And the way that we're going to do that is we can create another context to this set user. For example, if we want to do this, we're going to duplicate this. So this is going to be this set user context. And here we want to have provider for that item too. So here we can have this set user context. Then we're going to have this provider. And we should wrap the items that we want to access to this right here. So we got the C1 right here, and let's actually move this app up here, and we want to value to this, and here the value that we want to set is going to be this set user function that we have right here. And by this, if we come to the C1, we can access that. And here, if we come to this C2, for example, again, we can have the set user context to import here. So we're going to have this set user context. We want to have another variable right here. Let's say this has the name of change name. And here we want to use not user context, actually set user context. And here we can have simply this button, for example, which has this text of change name. And we're going to have this on click, which inside of this, we're going to have this change name. And we pass the value that we want. For example, we want to change that to Tom. Here, you can see if we click on this, this is going to change to Tom. But this is not a good way to manage context, because if we want to create one context for each of our states and function, this is going to be a really mess. So instead of this, we're going to get rid of the set user context that we just created right here. And let's get rid of this item here too. And let's come here into C2 and remove these change things that we added here. And let's get rid of only the handler part of our button and still have the button to be like this. And here, what we're going to do, instead of passing only this user right here, we're going to pass object into our context. So our user context is going to be containing this object that we're going to have right here. And inside of this, we're going to have two things. First one is going to be our user that we got right here. And the second one and the second thing that we want to add here, and we want this to be inside of our context, is going to be the set user function. So we're going to have the set user right here too. And now by having this, if we come here into our C2, you can see if we comment this button out, we can't see the value that we have right here. Because this time, this value is not single string, but this is object. If we console log this value right here, so let's have this value right here and open our console here, you can see here we got this object which has this user of Ted and the set user function. And the way that we can access to the thing and to the value that we want is going to be very simple. We're going to access the user field inside of our value. And you can see here we got our Ted right here. And we can have our button to have this handler of the function that we have passed through our context, which was this again value, because we have stored the thing in our context in this variable. And inside of this value, we're going to have the set user that we passed here. Pay attention, here we got this set user and here we're using it. And again, this is going to be simple function here. And here, let's have this Tom again. Now again, here if we come to our web page and click on this, you can see we have changed this result. And of course, we can use this context in all of our components. For example, let's again use that in our C1 too. So we're going to have this simple user, let's say, and we want to use context here. So we're importing that from React, and we're going to import this user context from our app too. So we got this item here too. And here in our C1, let's have this simple user dot user right here. And again, you can see we got this stat. And if we change this, we got change the value in both of these items. And of course, we can have multiple things coming and managing right here. For example, let's say here, instead of having this user, we got the simple number right here. So let's have this to be set number here. The context we want to be number context, not user context anymore. And here we should fix these tags right here too, and this provider. So we got number context right here as well as this item. And here in the value, we don't want to pass user and set user. We want to pass this number here and set number right here. Now let's come here into our C1. Again, let's copy this number word right here. Instead of user context, we want number context. Here we want that thing here too. So instead of this user, we got number, here number. Again, here we're going to have number and number. And if we come to this C2, again, here what we have to change is going to be this one, the value is right. Here we want to change this to number. Let's comment this out for a moment. Now you can see we got this result, but we're having this stat, and that is because of this base value that we have here in use state. So let's say here, instead of the stat, we use this number 5. You can see we got this number 5 right here. And actually, let's have our state displayed here too. So we got our number here too. And we got this 5 in all of our components right here. And let's at the C2, we got this button here. But instead of this change name, let's say we want to have this simple +1. And here what we want to have is this value that set number, which is a function, and the thing that we want inside of this, we're going to grab the value that it is currently. So we begin accessing that state using this value, that number, and we simply add this 1 to that. And now here, if we click this +1, you can see all of these items is going to be changed. And if we want to have, for example, 3 different buttons right here, let's actually have another BR here. So all of these 3 be at the same line. And here, let's say instead of +1, we got this 0 here. And here we got this -1 right here. So we change the logic here. Here we want that to be -1. And here we're simply passing the number 0 here. So here, if we refresh again, we got the value of 5 at first. If we add, it's going to increment in all of our components. If we click on this -1, all of them is going to decrease by 1 level. And if we click this 0, all of them is going to be this 0. And for example, if we want to have this to don't go to this negative numbers, what we can do is here, when we want to have this -1, we can have some logic here too. So inside of this function and our handler, we want to check first if our value, that's number, is equal to 0, then I'm going to use ternary operator here, which here we're going to have our condition. Here we're going to return if this condition was true, and here we're going to return the thing that if the condition was false. So if it's 0, let's say again we want to pass this 0. So we don't want to change that, but if it's not 0, we want to make that number to be 1 below of the thing that it is currently. So by having this, if we come to 0, if we +1, it goes. If we -1, it goes. But in the 0, when we click this -1, nothing is going to happen. And this is very useful when you want to pass users and user authentication things inside of your applications, which help you very, very much. And as I told you right here with set number and number, avoid having multiple contexts. But as you do that, pay attention, you don't want to have massive kind of contexts here too that you don't want to use. For example, in our example, if number and set number is going to work with each other and we need to pass both of these items, it's good to have something like this. But for example, if you have 5 states that you want to pass, don't put all of them in single context and have different contexts for the thing that you need. And again, for complex state managements, you can use this kind of context API, or you can consider using state management libraries like Redux, which is very popular. But this React Context API is a powerful tool to simplify state management and eliminate the hassle of prop drilling by thoughtfully implementing context. You can create more maintainable and scalable React applications using these options. So if you found this video helpful, please give a like and subscribe to the channel to don't miss the rest of our videos and wait for the next video about web development.